Hi, and welcome back to Mingus on Tech. I'm Ken Mingus, Executive Editor with Computer World. I'm here with Matthew Finnegan, also from Computer World. Today's topic, collaboration, the collaboration market and what's going on, so stick around. Okay, so Matthew, thanks for being here. I should note that Matthew is actually based in Sweden, and we have him in town this week because he's going to be in New York for the Slack Frontier, is that what it's called?
Yeah, Slack Frontiers.
Slack Frontier, to get the latest on what Slack is up to. As you probably know, collaboration is a very big market right now. There's a lot going on between Microsoft Teams, Slack, of course, Google Hangouts, Google Chat, Google Meeting, or Hangouts, Meeting, and Chat, and a variety of companies that are trying to edge their way into the market because of the changing workforce and how people are trying to get work done in a variety of places and different times and locations. So that's sort of the background of what why we're doing this. So Matthew, what is Slack up to these days, as best you can tell?
Well, as you're saying, it's a busy, very competitive market at the moment. I mean, Slack effectively kickstarted the market for team collaboration, team chat tools focused on supporting team collaboration. And I suppose over the past year or so, the big challenge for Slack has been the introduction of a variety of competitors. Most notably, I suppose, would be Microsoft and Microsoft Teams. So over the past while, we've also been seeing Slack building out its sort of enterprise capabilities.
Yep. Enterprise Grid, is that what it's called?
Enterprise Grid was launched so about a year or so ago, which supports a much larger number of users and provides some more administrative controls and IT focused features to really support wider deployments of Slack, which kind of initially would take the route of deployments by smaller teams within a large organization.
Yeah. And
so there's been more of a concerted effort to I guess sort of engage with CIOs and have like enterprise-wide deployments of Slack, which we're starting to see now. They're getting a lot of big-name customers, which we'll be talking at the event this week in New York, and so there's been a focus on that. And in recent months, there's been more security administrative features announced, such as the enterprise key management and so forth.
It's interesting. People don't think about that, but when it comes to something like collaboration, and you've got employees who are sharing documents, sharing corporate data, sensitive information that's being communicated, that one of the things these companies like Slack and Microsoft, obviously, and others have to keep in mind is how do you manage all that stuff and keep it secure. Mm-hmm. And it does seem that Slack, I think we've been using Slack here at Computer World and parts of IDG for 3-4 years now. And by the time we got to it, it had obviously been around a while. But it really felt like it sort of bubbled up from below rather than being sort of this corporate tool that was handed to you from IT or as Microsoft is now trying to do with Teams and where it's being integrated with Office. But Slack sort of bubbled up. But clearly a lot of companies, especially like Microsoft, seem to be trying to push Slack aside if they can and edge their way into the market. Is that sort of what you're seeing over the last year or so?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Slack has had this advantage of being very popular with users, whereas in the past, with enterprise social networks, for example, there's been a lot of top-down rollouts.
Microsoft Yammer, perhaps?
Exactly.
Did anybody use it? Yammer? I'm sorry, we tried it a little while. We never could get it to really be, nobody really wanted to use it. Sorry.
Yeah, and that was one of the problems with a lot of these tools was actually achieving the high levels of user adoption with people actually wanting to use these tools on a regular basis. was difficult to do. Although there does seem to still be a place for enterprise social networks. Team Chat has evolved, has been introduced by users as a way of getting work done, which Slack has obviously done very well with, but now others are seeing the opportunity as we start to get more large organizations wanting to use these tools. It's attracted the likes of Microsoft and Google and even Facebook with Workplace.
That's right,
as well.
Workplace by Facebook, yeah. One of the things I wanted to find out is, or I guess I should explain real quick, that in terms of the way we use Slack, and I think this may mirror how a lot of companies may be using it, with Matthew being in Sweden and I'm in Framingham in Massachusetts, for us to coordinate in real time on a story, we're in communication in real time, and we can edit in real time, send documents back and forth. And that's something that, a few years ago, as we were talking earlier, you would have done largely by email, which would have been, first of all, a nightmare because you'd be sending emails back and forth. And secondly, it's not really real time. It's kind of real time depending on when somebody gets the email. But I mean, when you think about the role Slack and other collaboration tools play now, just take a look at on those rare occasions when Slack goes down. My Twitter feed blows up. Well, work's over for the day because Slack is off, and there are obviously a lot of companies that are now relying on these kinds of tools to get work done. So with that background, so what is Microsoft trying to do with Teams, or what are it seems like they're trying to tie it closer to Office 365 and just make it another part of the suite there that people will naturally gravitate to or use.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is clearly the major strength with Microsoft Teams is the very tight integration with the Office 365 productivity tools, as well as just the fact that it's bundled in with the subscription to Office 365. So essentially, if your organization is using the Office 365 suite, you already have Teams there. Mm-hmm. So it means if there's a decision to be made of rolling out Slack or using Teams, which is already available, then there's a big benefit there. So that's where Microsoft has been pushing its advantage. And at Ignite conference last week, it was there were the most recent user adoption figures were announced, and so it's 329,000 businesses are using Office 365. So
you mean Teams in Office 365?
Sorry, we're using Teams.
Right. Okay. So over 300,000 already, and Teams has been around for about a year, or is it longer?
I believe it was 2016. It was
a couple of years.
And then general availability was about a year ago, I believe. So,
okay.
So it's grown very quickly. But there's a question mark over to what degree these organizations are actually using Teams. Microsoft publishes different sort of metrics on user adoption to Slack does, to how Slack does. So Slack has 8 million daily active users, which Microsoft doesn't break out. So it's harder to gauge whether a lot of these organizations are actually using Teams or whether it's available within their organization.
Yeah, it's interesting. You make a good point there, because as we've talked about this over the last few months, one of the issues that companies often have when they're rolling out the software is, of course, you do have the concerns about security, as I mentioned earlier, but also just sort of being able to decide or figure out whether employees are actually using the tools. Okay, so somebody logs into Office 365 and you can maybe count that as, they're in the suite and Teams is available. But, again, back to my earlier comment, I haven't seen anybody light their hair on fire on Twitter because Microsoft Teams happened to go down, and that doesn't mean that I would have to believe that Microsoft, given the powerhouse that it is in the enterprise, probably does present a threat to Slack just because Microsoft is so ubiquitous around the world, and because so many companies, are using Office. I mean, that gives them a real foothold into the enterprise in a way that sort of, like I say, Slack kind of bubbled up from the bottom. Do you get a sense from, and I guess you may find out more this week down in New York at the Slack event, but do you get a sense that Slack is worried about Microsoft? I mean, obviously, I'm sure they're keeping track of what they're doing, but are they quaking in their boots because Microsoft is coming after them, or do they feel pretty confident that they've got a pretty good foothold and they can hold their own?
Yeah, it definitely appears so, and Slack has plenty of momentum itself. I mean, a lot of analysts are saying that Microsoft Microsoft Teams is a substantial threat to Slack, but at the same time, Slack recently announced more funding, $427 million of funding in its latest round, and has been acquiring more companies and building out its own features and capabilities, and also, I guess to some degree, taking on Microsoft in its own area by launching the enterprise grid product and going after larger deployments. So, I think there's a major challenge for Slack here, but the line I guess Slack seems to be taking is this is just showing the interest that there is among large organizations for team chat tools, for channel-based communications, and for the market that they're going after in general, that Microsoft is putting so much weight behind Teams. Kind of validates their approach and what they're doing to a large degree.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and it's interesting. Again, we were talking about this a little earlier, but when you think about the way people use collaboration tools now, first of all, you've got a changing workforce, or what appears to be a changing workforce, where you have a mix of employees that come into the office on different days or at different times. You've got some people who work from home. You've got people who are traveling a lot and doing work on their, mobile devices or tablets. And so work gets done in a different way. As you said, I don't know that there are any companies where people punch the clock at 9 o'clock in the morning and punch out at 5 o'clock and nothing happens outside those hours. And when you've got collaboration tools like these, and they do seem to be building onto them routinely. The major companies are buying smaller companies and adding their software to the collaboration tools, sort of building them out a bit by bit. In fact, what was it? Slack last week, was it they bought Astro? Was that last week or recently?
Yeah, last week they bought Astro.
And what do we have an idea what they plan to do with the Astro IP or whatever it is that they got in the deal?
So with a lot of the acquisitions Slack has made in recent years, has been to acquire companies and incorporate their technology into the Slack platform, such as Screen Hero. I think in 2015 started to integrate some of those features. And with so Astro is an email client which used machine learning to help simplify management of email. And they built a Slack bot, AstroBot, which is very popular, which basically allows Slack users to manage their email and respond to emails and receive notifications within Slack, so that you can reply without switching applications.
So you stay in the application, which is of course what companies like you to do.
Exactly, and it makes a lot of sense for an application like Slack to be the sort of the central hub for your work and for your productivity, so you're not switching constantly between applications. And so it seems that the Astro client has been shut down, and it looks like the technology will be integrated in some way into Slack going forward. So I'm not sure exactly what form that's going to take yet, but it kind of just shows how Slack is looking to bridge the gap between this new way of working with team chat and channels and email, and showing that email isn't going away. But
it might morph, between and something in between, a collaboration tool and traditional email as we know it. You another point you make, and I think you had said that this was something that Slack might be looking at or talking about more this week, is the growth of AI and machine learning and little botnets to try to smooth out or streamline the processes that people use. I know that recently, when I've logged on to our Office 365 suite here, I remember seeing something that said, Intelligent Agent is now available. Would you like to turn it on? I didn't until I know more about exactly what Intelligent Agent's going to do. But I mean, that kind of sort of building out AI and ML, machine learning, seems to be something that the industry is looking at very, very closely. Are you seeing that, with the different companies? Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the challenges with team collaboration, I guess that's kind of been emerging, is that as more and more work is carried out in an application such as Slack or in Teams, and as more users are actually put onto these platforms across large organizations, I mean, there's a lot of noise and distraction, I guess, from a lot of team chat, and also there's a lot of potential for connecting employees with other employees and finding information across the organization. But that can be quite difficult when there's so much data thrown around. So
Good point.
there's various ways that artificial intelligence and machine learning can be used to improve collaboration. I mean, as we discussed with Astro and AstroBot, there are many bots that are used within Slack as a very popular way to sort of support work and productivity within Slack. But there's Slack's search learning intelligence division is focused on improving using machine learning to improve search capabilities within Slack, and which will benefit large organizations as they use it more, and becomes for surfacing documents, for connecting with people, but also we're increasingly seeing with Microsoft Teams as well that machine learning and artificial intelligence can be used as part of the meeting room experience and meeting processes for video conferencing and so forth. Either an intelligent assistant suggesting documents ahead of a meeting with certain colleagues around projects that you may have been working on, as well as even Microsoft announced integration with Cortana, which was focused around kickstarting meetings, basically, which is also something that Cisco with Spark, as it was the Spark Assistant. Now I believe it's the Cisco WebEx Teams Assistant, maybe, was kind of the first one to do that, as far as I'm aware, to using a voice-activated assistant to kick off a video conference. So there's plenty of possibilities, and then obviously Amazon and Alexa for Business, the meeting room is a focus there as well. So there's a variety of ways that AI is either helping now or poised to help collaboration and productivity.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I know we won't have time to get into this. This will be our next discussion, but the whole idea of digital assistants and voice activation here, and how that would play a role in, as you said, surfacing documents that you and whoever's in your team or your channel might want before a meeting, or even just being able to say to Cortana, schedule a meeting with, Joe, Sue, and Mary to talk about X, Y, and Z on this date, and it gets scheduled. Everybody gets a notification, and then figuring out ways that the meeting room and the bridge or whatever people are using to communicate is all set up for you, so you don't have those hideous things where everybody's like, "Is somebody on? Is everybody there? Did somebody just come on the meeting?" To have that sort of streamlined and smoothed out, it's sort of an adjunct to collaboration, but that's how work gets done now. Mm-hmm. And one of the things. One of the big players we haven't talked much about, and I want to just ask real quickly, Google with G Suite. I know that you were at the Google Cloud Next, and there was a lot of discussion there about trying to figure out ways of doing AI and ML and building out some of the parts of G Suite that Hangouts and Hangouts Chat. Any sense for whether Google, is making a real play for this? Are we in sort of a Teams versus Slack world, or is it still too early to tell?
Yeah, Google is definitely focused on team collaboration and team chat specifically. As you mentioned, Google Hangouts has been divided into two products now. Google Hangouts Meet, which is for video conferencing, and Google Hangouts Chat, which is obviously around team chat capabilities. So it's definitely an area that Google is focused on. And again, in a similar approach to Microsoft, these tools are available within the G Suite productivity suite subscription. So you don't. It's not a best of breed tool like Slack. It doesn't require a separate subscription cost for large businesses. But so Google is definitely a player in this market too. It perhaps hasn't made as bold moves as Microsoft has, as some of its competitors have. But then there's also a variety of others, as we mentioned, Cisco WebEx Teams and Facebook Workplace, which takes a slightly different approach. Is more kind of social network, enterprise social network focused, as you would imagine with
Not a
Facebook.
surprise with Facebook, yeah.
Yeah, and but they're also targeting some similar use cases, and not just for knowledge workers as well. Facebook Workplace is targeted also towards frontline workers in hospitality, in retail sectors, and so forth, which is a big audience, which Microsoft is also looking at with Teams. So there's a variety of players. Also, some unified communications companies that are also building out their own team chat capabilities as well. So Slack and Microsoft are definitely grabbing the headlines at the moment, but it's a very competitive space, and it'll be interesting to see if there's any more consolidation in the market as there was with Atlassian.
Yeah, boy, that caused a bit of a stink, huh? Yeah, explain that. What that happened late July, I think.
Yeah, so basically Atlassian had two team chat tools, HipChat, which has been around for a number of years, and Stride, which was announced, I believe, about a year ago. And
I know, it was a fairly new product.
Yeah, it was given a general availability release, I believe, just a few months ago, earlier this year. So, and Stride was kind of seen as the Slack competitor for Atlassian, and it was well received as a product. The aim was to kind of reduce some of the noise around collaboration, and it seems to do quite a good job of that. But the market, Slack has obviously shown that it's leading in the market, and it made sense for Atlassian to strike this deal with Slack, which has meant that Slack acquired the IP for HipChat and Stride, and subsequently discontinued both tools, with the idea that being that Atlassian would encourage users from both tools onto Slack's platform.
Yeah.
And so, which is kind of makes sense for both companies. It means that Atlassian isn't fighting in a market which is taking a lot of its attention and so forth.
Right.
Slack has one less competitor to worry about now.
One way to get them off the field.
Yeah, exactly, and also access to a lot more users, and there'll be a strong partnership between the two companies going forward. But it did mean that a lot of HipChat and Stride users weren't too happy about the news, as it's obviously caused disruption for them, and a lot of users have been sort of venting their frustrations about that. The two CEOs of Atlassian at their user event in Spain recently apologised to users and sort of noted that it was a difficult decision, but one that makes sense in the long term for the company, and for users it should do as well. There's some concerns about HipChat on-premise users that might not want to move to the clouds, but there are some options there for on-premise tools, and but generally it seems to be well received as a decision for both companies.
Yeah, I do think it makes sense when you look at it from the broader market perspective. I just think that it was kind of not ironic, but interesting that the HipChat and Stride users were, I think because they were caught off guard by the announcement, and then realized they were going to have to migrate to either Slack or something else. And you wrote about it on some of the message boards right after the announcement. They were not amused. I guess people, when you get used to these tools, especially if you can customize them, and you think of them as user friendly, people kind of get invested in whatever collaboration tool they wind up with. Okay, I should let you go. Now you got a flight to get. Any last thoughts about where we are right now, or do you think we pretty much covered the state of the collaboration market?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about with it. It's a very busy market, and what's just interesting is that it's still kind of early days in terms of large-scale deployments at big enterprise organizations. So it'll be interesting to see how the market continues to develop and how large businesses can really get benefits from these tools.
Yeah, well, we're going to stay on top of this. Probably the next time we do this, I'll have you on by Skype or something from Sweden, but I do want to pick your brain again. Matthew, thanks for being here today. Collaboratively speaking, as it were, that's a wrap.